the first thing that struck me about this was I was like, oh, hell yes, we're in like wonderful old actual magnetic, real film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, yes, there is a slight graininess to everything that happened before digital, but there is just like, I mean, like I sound like a hipster, but whatever.
It looks better. It looks better. I mean, there's certain effects you can do with digital film in terms of exposure and stuff that you can't do with grainy film. But I don't know. I had an ex-girlfriend who said it really well, which is film looks like it's the look of memory. Hello, Dukes here, and I have a quick announcement for you. We have a date for the semi-screening of Sideways, the culminating event of this Foodie Films series, on Thursday, January 11th at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. We are going to encourage everybody to watch Sideways on their own, somewhere, at the exact same time, and then we will convene a live episode where Chris and I discuss it with some kind of listener participation. I'm not sure exactly what, but maybe you can chat questions at us. Maybe there'll even be some kind of tipping set up where you can make us do humiliating things like sing songs. It's probably going to be about 3 hours in total. It's a big honking event. And if you miss it, all is not lost. We'll put it in the podcast. But if you want to check that out, stay attuned to our website or social media for details, uppermiddlebrow.com. Again, it's Thursday, January 11th at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, a live episode about Sideways. That's coming up. Really excited about that. I am coming to you from the cozy confines of the Upper Middlebrow Mobile Bureau, aka my camper. I am actually in the street in front of my friend Dennis's house in Kansas City, and I left Chicago. I left my lovely apartment in Chicago. I will be renting that out and doing a sojourn in the desert Southwest, particularly Southern California, around Joshua Tree, LA, San Diego. So if you're in that area, keep me in mind for your, literary salons or other soirees or surfing, kayaking adventures. Maybe I'll see you out there, and we'll share some updates on the show. By the time you hear this, it will be the winter solstice, which means the worst is over. The days will be getting longer, so thank goodness for that. Those short days are really rough for me. I don't know about you. There'll probably be some cold weather and snow coming your way, depending on where you live, but the days will be getting longer. You made it. And who knows, we might even see spring and summer again. Finally, just a reminder to check out the Upper Middlebrow website and fill out our listener survey. We are going to keep nagging you about this until we get enough survey results. We've had a few, so thank you for those people, but it takes you about 2 minutes, and this is your chance to help us shape the show and tell us, hey, you know what, it's too long, you guys ramble too much, or I want you to do more of this. Help us make the show better. Go to uppermiddlebrow.com and look for the link to the survey. And now, on to our episode about Ang Lee's brilliant film, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman.
Boy, I'd never seen this before.
Me neither.
Oh, really? Okay. God, this is, I had thought that you had seen this before, which is great because one of my questions hinges on that moment. But,
no, this is God, one that I found in a lot of lists. And it was one, how Monica talked to us about wanting to see the fish going into the fryer and all of that. It was one that I sensed would be sort of like that, and sure enough, it certainly is. But we start, in fact, with Chu, the old man, one of our protagonists. In fact, grabbing some mudfish and scoring them with a blade and throwing them into a fire. Here's an old man. He's probably about 60, I would say. He's not that old, but he's past young, that's for sure.
He's approaching retirement age.
Right. We get the sense maybe early 60s, maybe mid 60s. And he's cooking magnificently and expertly. And we figure out that it's his house, which is a really interesting combination of Eastern and Western influences, I think. We see some interesting intercuts with Taipei traffic. His house is very peaceful by comparison. And then what he's cooking, we figure out, well, he has a conversation with one of his daughters, probably, who's also cooking. And then very quickly we get into a meal. And we see the meal he's preparing, which is this amazing Taiwanese hot pot and other courses and dumplings. And they're sitting in this kind of like Victorian round dining nook that they revisit many times. And we get to know the three daughters whose story we're going to follow along with Chu for the rest of the movie.
We've got Jia Jian, the eldest, a school teacher who has definitely she's really portrayed as like a sort of young spinster. She's probably in her 30s, but the filmmakers this is Ang Lee, but the filmmakers and the design team has really gone out of their way to make her like very plain.
She wears kind of like Victorian collared shirts buttoned all the way to the top and a kind of plain, and she is pretty. But you also you do sense a little bit of aging, that she's not quite in the full flush of youth, although still young. Yeah, probably mid-30s, something like that. She's a school teacher. We see her teaching a little bit. She's strict. Her students don't really respect her. It's interesting because I don't know that we can do the whole plot. So my inclination is that we just sort of do the arcs and not try to keep track exactly.
I think that's a great idea. Her arc is essentially one of she had her heart broken when she was in university. And very interestingly, we kind of discover that her version of events is actually not correct. We meet the guy that supposedly broke her heart, and he doesn't even remember her and not because they actually had any kind of romance. She kind of imagined it. And her arc is sort of discovering the fullness of herself. There is a volleyball coach who kind of begins to sort of court her from afar, which is overlaid with the fact that her students are playing a really mean joke on her where they leave love letters at her desk. She thinks it's coming from the volleyball coach, and it's not. And it's one of the saddest moments of the movie. Right. Oh my God, when she discovers that actually that hasn't been coming from him. She's gotten dressed up for this day, where she you kind of imagine that she's going to like talk to him about the letters and to kind of confess to him. There's no letter waiting for her, and she discovers that her students have been playing a trick on her. It's very sad, and you're like, oh no, I don't want to see the film go in this direction. This poor spinster, brokenhearted school teacher is going to continue in this direction, but no. Then yes, the volleyball coach comes through and like talks to the students and is like, guys, that sucked. Don't do that ever again. And they end up getting married. And he converts to Christianity, which is a little bit of an odd moment. Yep.
It's actually unclear to me whether he was he was clearly being a little bit flirty, but it's unclear to me whether he was actually flirting with her or just being gregarious and friendly, and whether it's that moment of seeing her so upset and vulnerable, and he goes and comforts her and sort of gives her a hug, and that's when she melts. And sort of the entire film up to this point, she has been denying that she's lonely, and in that moment she stops denying it, and it's sort of that's when they kiss for the first time. And it was unclear to me, and maybe it's just because of the lost in translation, whether he had actually been flirting or whether that's the moment he really becomes interested. But yes, that is her arc. We have Jiaxian. Interesting. Taiwanese Mandarin is a very interesting sound. The ends sound like French ends. They're sort of swallowed like a Jiaxian as opposed to Shen. She's the middle daughter. She is a very successful executive at an airline. She's portrayed as a knockout and is, I think, a knockout, but also is dressed and made up in such a way to emphasize that. And her arc is that she's doing very well at the company and she's in line for a major promotion. She's going to be a VP at Amsterdam, and she's pretty excited about that. But she has a couple different things going on, and one is that she loves to cook. She grew up in her kitchen. Chu, we sort of learn over time, her father is a master chef, and she used to follow her dad and her kind of honorary uncle, Old Wen, around the kitchen and learn to cook, and she loved it. But then Chu basically shooed her out of the kitchen and said, you need to do something serious with your life, because he sensed her talent and potential. But she's never really forgiven him for that. And there's a scene where she's got a kind of off again, on again boyfriend, and she goes over to his house and she just wants to cook. And she has a giant 2 bags of groceries and spends like 3 hours cooking him the most amazing meal, for which he is only slightly appreciative. And
her plight, like her character plight, is that like the things that are important to her have been taken from her,
right?
And so she has taken on the stuff that she thinks society wants her to do,
and she's good at it.
And she's good at it. Yeah, she's facile. Like, she's good at this stuff. She's talented. She could probably do anything she wants. But she's harboring some resentment about not being able to follow a life of cooking. The on-again, off-again boyfriend is a real feature of like her sort of stunted emotional growth that is resolved in kind of one of my like favorite and more surprising moments. She ends up almost beginning a romance
yeah, well, go ahead.
With the character that the eldest daughter thinks broke her heart.
Another airline executive, a handsome young airline executive who is visiting, to work on a project with her.
And they almost fall into a romance. They don't, because the middle daughter sort of confronts him about it. And then you get the sense that she needs some kind of companionship, and she goes to her on-again, off-again boyfriend, who is sort of like, I've got somebody else. Can we talk tomorrow?
Yeah. And he's not being... That's within their agreement. They are
totally
seeing
within
other
their
people,
agreement.
But it hurts her. It stings her.
It does.
Yeah.
And it hurts her even more when she does have that lunch date with him. He tells her that he is getting married to that particular woman, and then makes a pass at her in this like incredibly gross, like very like, oh my God, this is ugly kind of manner. And that's this character's plight. Like, she's trying to kind of grow up. She buys an apartment that uses all of her savings to buy an apartment. It turns out that's a fraud and a scam, and she loses her savings, and she's really adrift without any of the like financial implications of being adrift.
And probably one of the things we should mention is that at the beginning of the film, she and Chu, her dad, are feuding a lot. They are at each other's throats. And we have the sense that they care about each other deeply, but they also just can't get along, and they're always finding fault. One of the subplots is that Chu has lost his sense of taste, and Jiaxian is very quick to point out whenever something is off with his cooking, which he denies, but then when he's at his restaurant, he's always getting Old Wen to taste stuff for him because he knows he's losing his sense of taste too. So he's kind of cooking by memory as opposed to tasting throughout. And another subplot is that Jiaxian becomes concerned about her father's health. So even though she's been offered this exciting promotion in Amsterdam, she accidentally sees her father at the cardiology department at the hospital, and that sets up the expectation that he's perhaps headed for a heart attack. and for the rest of the film and into the very final, almost the penultimate scene, she is concerned about that. But maybe we should go to Jianying, and then we can talk about the denouement, because all of everything everything kind of wraps out very quickly.
It does, and very well.
Yeah,
I gotta say, like this as a piece of well-made drama, this is really good. Like the technical aspects of the script are
right,
basically perfect.
Yeah, the narrative control of the way the 3, 4, or 5 storylines intersect with one another, inform one another, but do not get ahead of one another is really fabulous. Splendid.
Totally impressive, yeah. Jianying, a college student who works at Wendy's. This is sort of the throwaway subplot.
It's like soup thickener.
Like you get the sense that Ang Lee is like, well, if things happen in 2s, it's a mistake, but if it's 3, it's a pattern. I need a third, and kind of throws in this third sister, and also like the echoes of Chekhov are just everywhere, and so you kind of get the sense that there's a little 3 sisters nod happening here. It's this subplot is very light, and maybe that's the important part. It's kind of frivolous. She's a college student. One of her friends has a boyfriend. Her friend mistreats the boyfriend. Plays a lot of hard to get, says that she actually loves him, but we never really know if she actually did. And Jianying meets the boyfriend.
She only wants him when she can't have him, it seems like.
Exactly, yeah. Meets the boyfriend, and it's hard to say that they fall in love, but there is certainly an affection that grows between them. Maybe because of the boyfriend's sort of, he does have some real, like, soft spots about who he is and about what he feels for his family, and you get the sense that maybe she is attracted to that, and they get pregnant. And the Sunday dinners,
by the end it's clear that they have fallen in love. I think they have a real tenderness for each other that is on display in the last moments of the film.
And we learn that at it's the first big announcement, the first like real big announcement.
There's many big announcements,
and they all happen at the Sunday dinners.
Yeah,
the Sunday dinners are the intermissions of this. Like if you think about this as like a classical 5-act play or 4-act play or whatnot, the dinners are sort of either the culmination of each act or the way that each act kicks off. Sure. And she announces that she is pregnant at one of them. And she's sort of like summarily, like there's this great like progression of the daughters kind of like shacking up with people and then like leaving on like a motorcycle or in a taxi or
it's kind of like Fiddler on the Pagoda.
There's the title. That could be it. We'll have to run that past a sensitivity reader. Right. But yeah, that's a very possible one. Anything else about Jianying?
No, I think you got it. Yeah, and I mean, I think, we have some other minor characters who are important, but their arcs are not as great. I mean, there's Old Wen, who is an avuncular figure, especially to Zhixuan, just a buddy to Chu. Sadly, about 2/3 of the way through the film, he dies. And he also has a scare. I think his death is important because it's what starts bringing Zhixuan and Chu kind of back together. Because no matter how much they feud and fight, it's clear that they both love Old Wen and that he's kind of equally fond of both of them. And when he is gone, it's sort of, I think that mourning together is something that they share in common. And I think that's very nice. We have Jinrong and her daughter Shan Shan, who's a housekeeper. Another funny little subplot where Chu starts cooking for the daughter, and then it's sort of like Three's Company like subplot where he then starts giving her a lunch, but then eating her terrible lunches that Jinrong cooks because he doesn't want to offend her. And then we have Mrs. Lang, who is Jinrong's mother, who is pretty bad. Although I have to say, having just rewatched the scene where she gets very upset, I felt really sad for her in that moment.
Oh, yeah. My God.
She thinks that she is paying court to Chu. And she's not a good listener. She's always smoking in the house, even though he's
blowing
coughing
it in his face.
and blowing it in his face. So she's not great. But what she doesn't realize, and what we learn towards the end, is in fact Chu has a secret romance with her daughter, Jinrong, who's probably also in her 30s, maybe 40, but I think like somewhere in the 35. So it's very much a May December romance, and it turns out the reason Jiashen saw Chu in the hospital is he was getting his heart checked out to make sure that his health was good, so that the mother wouldn't worry that he would die young if he marries the daughter. Mm-hmm. And so there's this kind of wedding banquet for the two couples. He gets up, makes this kind of long, rambling announcement. There's probably the most self-conscious sort of tracking shot. Normally the camera work is very subtle, but this is a moment where it's being very self-conscious. It encircles them, kind of looking in on them through the various windows. And finally, at the end of the announcement, he announces that he and Jinrong, the young housekeeper, love each other and are going to buy a new house and essentially get married. The mother, Mrs. Lang, feels terrible about this. She kind of passes out. She starts cursing them out. So big denouement. Everyone's sort of shocked, and then we have a kind of moment where it's all on the table. Like a lot, especially Chu,
literally on the table.
A lot of the emotions have been bottled up in this film. Many, and this is a moment where it's all out there, which is ugly and it's difficult, but that kind of allows everybody to move forward. And then we get this kind of epilogue type scene where, in fact, Jinrong and Chu do move in together. Mrs. Lang is apparently upset about it, but tolerant, has learned to live with it. Zhezhen is married to her husband. I can't remember the name of the volleyball coach. They seem to be doing well. Jianing has a baby. They seem to be doing pretty well, and I'll let you describe the very last thing that we see, which is
Jiaxian has taken the job in Amsterdam. We learned that she does in fact take that promotion after first saying no, but we learn in this epilogue that she has taken that, and she is cooking the final Sunday dinner, and the family house is sold.
Boxes everywhere, half empty. The locks have been changed. He comes
back to his own house, right? The locks have been changed, and everybody has canceled except for Shu, and Jiaxian is doing all the cooking, and they have a meal together, and at first he thinks that she has put too much ginger in the soup, and she corrects him. She tastes it and she says, "I think you're wrong. I think
you never liked Mother's recipe."
Yep, and you were always too easy with the ginger, and he tastes again, and his taste comes back, and he asks for more. And there's this one very similar to the Tampopo scene when they eat the good ramen, and you can see how much like relish he is like experiencing with being able to taste again. And the movie ends with the two of them looking at each other, and I can't remember if he says daughter first or she says father first, but there's an exchange where she says father and he says daughter, and it's done. And the family unit has been repaired through wild like destruction and opening up and
transformed and repaired. It's not the same as it was before. It's something new, but it is also, there's hope and there's joy.
If you were going to teach like how to write a well-made play, this is the syllabus.
Oh, wow.
Like this is the curriculum. Like, because it so perfectly hits like all of those things, like just what you described. The family is transformed but repaired. It's not the same, but it is better than it's been. Like It's really remarkable. The more I think about this movie, the more I think that like this is really 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 good.
I would not teach it in a screenwriting 101 class because
No. This is a 401.
It is a 401. It
Yeah.
is, and it's a masterful screenplay. And Ang Lee didn't write the screenplay, but it is also, I'm going to ask you a question about this later. But I'll just say, like, Ang Lee's, the filmmaking, I would say, is something like perfect, but almost never reveals itself. That you always just sort of feel like you're in the story.
The first thing that struck me about this was I was like, oh hell yes, we're in like wonderful old actual magnetic, real film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, because like, and then that like, yes, there is a slight graininess to everything that happened before digital, but there is just like, like I sound like a hipster, but whatever. Like there is something
better. It looks better. I mean, there's
Yeah.
certain effects you can do with digital film in terms of exposure and stuff that you can't do with grainy film. But I don't know. I had an ex-girlfriend who said it really well, which is film looks like it's the look of memory.
Oh, that's great! Wow,
And-
that is a really really good. That's a really really good way to put it.
I think it's absolutely right. Or it was something. Or it was
Yeah.
like film looks like the way we see ourselves when we remember ourselves, or something like that.
Oh, that's a beautiful. Wow. So that's kind of my question. I've got a quote here. Because the initial shot of the traffic,
Yeah.
and there are recurring images of traffic in Taipei that I think are important. I mean, it's not just B-roll. It's not just like scene setting. Like everything in this movie is intended to be there.
Yeah.
And like movement and progress and all that stuff is really important. And we mostly see the traffic beginning to move from a stop.
Right.
Like that's generally what he is setting up. But so he said about more recent efforts like Life of Pi or Billy Lynn's Halftime Walk, which I had never heard of, and then I just watched the trailer today, and I really want to see.
Haven't heard of it either.
So, quote, I thought, and so what he's talking about here is the interviewer is asking him about creating films in 3D and having that third dimension very palpably accessible to you. So I thought it was with a different dimension, with a z-axis. If I can place the audience differently, maybe I could get away with it. So that's how I began. I had never done anything like that, but I quickly realized that's what digital cinema should be doing. It should have dimension. It shouldn't be doing what film is doing. It should have its own thing. I don't have a lot of curiosity to do 2D movies anymore. I think we've known most of what we know since the 70s. Nowadays, it's simply a matter of doing that well. So my question for you, does this movie feel two-dimensional? And I realize that I'm possibly playing a little fast and loose here because like I'm not talking about the sort of emotional dimensionality. I'm talking about the actual like appearance of it. Did you find it visually two-dimensional?
No, because there is a lot of variety in the point of view and a lot of variety between intimate camera and establishing camera and medium camera. But to his point, they were masters of that by the 1970s. The film is a lot like watching The Godfather, which has a lot of like shooting and killing, but is actually if you leave that aside, it's a very similar story, right?
I love it. Oh my god.
No, it's a family drama, right? It's about
right. Yeah, it's a family melodrama.
And I think that kind of peaked in the 1970s and sort of the naturalistic acting style. So no, it doesn't seem two-dimensional, but I totally understand what he's saying, and I completely agree with it, which is if you're going to use digital technology, you should do what digital technology is good at. Digital technology is not good at that effect that my ex described, that sort of, you can tell it's film and there's a realism to it that's realer than real. in a way. It's because it looks a little bit grainy that you know it's real. If that makes sense. I mean, it's like looking at my grandfather was a very good amateur photographer and shot thousands of photos on Kodachrome slide from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And it just nothing looks better than that. Nothing will ever, for the kind of photography he was doing, you can never... I just don't think you can make anything look better than that for what he was doing, which was this kind of slice of life documentary in like 1968 Paris, and women wearing like beautiful wool suits, like walking onto the tram, you know, like it's just that's what that should look like. And I think so. I see his point, but I think that he is actually locating the viewer in space and moving them around the space quite a bit. So it doesn't feel two-dimensional to me visually in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a softball question, but like there's so many moments of just like absolutely amazing filming. When
very subtle though, like it's
oh my God,
it's not like watching Scorsese where you're like, oh my God, like he didn't cut the entire time they walked through the restaurant, or like Tarantino or the Coen brothers.
Which happens in this one.
Sure,
there's a tracking shot in the kitchen. Yeah, but it's amazing.
And I don't. I mean, I guess I didn't notice that because I was just too busy just drinking the set, you know. You know, I watched it 1.5 times. I watched it all the way through, and then today, as we were prepping, I watched like the first half hour and the last half hour again. I would love to watch it again. So I started paying a little more attention to the camera work, and it's generally not. It's not doing it. It's well done, but it's rarely drawing attention to itself. It's not flashy camera work. You're not sort of like, oh my God, that shot was amazing. Like the camera tracked over the fence and then like did this, and just that moment, the person you saw, like the focus pulled and that person was doing the thing in deep focus. Oh my God, they must have planned this. There's nothing like that. It's just good, simple, straightforward camera work and good editing, everything done perfectly. But nothing extraordinary. There was nothing that made my eyes pop out in terms of the camera work.
The moment that I'm mostly thinking of is when Jiajian gets all dressed up, and she thinks she is going to like go talk to the volleyball coach about the letters that he's been leaving her. The courtyard of the school, when she arrives that day, is thronged with people doing like so much life, so much activity. And the next cut, it's maybe in the afternoon or later that day, and it very quickly goes from that scene of just like bustling life, and it is empty. And like you get the sense that he like put a different filter in, but not a very different filter, because like the green has like slightly darkened, and it looks like you're cutting from like a market in Calcutta to the surface of the moon. Right.
And well, and a lot of it, he's doing a lot of montage and editing that's pairing unlike things, but often it's often a question of busyness versus quietude. It's motion versus stillness, big versus small, light versus dark. You know, it's and often the images themselves. No, I mean, it's a great point. And a lot of the storytelling of the school, there's sort of there's the space of the classroom, the space of the teacher's lounge, and the tumult. And she feels very vulnerable in that tumult. It's almost as though all those people are laughing at her, even though they're not. But you kind of have that sense. It's as though they're like a flock of crows being all like, Spencer, lonely one, you know, like they're all tormenting her, like, you know, even though that's not really what's happening, but that's how she feels, and you get it. I mean, I was thinking about this, and I was like, film is kind of emotionally fascist, because there are a lot of dirty tricks or clean tricks that get you feeling what the character is going to feel, like the moment that she is offered the promotion, the thunder claps. And I didn't notice it the first time. And that happens a lot. It also happens, I think, when we get the first glimmer that Chu might have heart problems, which turns out not to be true. And I realized the thunderclaps are these little pangs of anxiety that Jiaxin is feeling, and you know, you don't know that you notice, but you notice, and so he's giving us a lot to work with in terms of how everything feels. It's sort of like what we talked about with The Arrest, that the landscape and the visuals are giving us the internality. Which character do you find most relatable?
Jiaxian, the middle, the middle character. I really do. I mean, we spend most of our time in and around her subjectivity, and I think that, like a lot of these movies, like that are done in this way, good storytellers and screenwriters and writers in general know that they when you're doing something like this, if you try to locate all of your elements in a single character, it will just tear that character apart.
Right.
like
James
Dean. It
Dean.
just can't. Yeah, James Dean, the black hole of 1950s cinema. But so we get these other characters that make more sense of Jiaxian's emotional arc and Shu's emotional arc, which is really, that's the crucial center of this.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us would like to think of ourselves as of having Jiaxian's plight. Like, oh, like, you know, we're, you know, sort of talented people who are maybe doing the second best thing we could be doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I think that is like where a lot of us kind of think of ourselves. And so that's why she's the most relatable to me. Is it the same thing for you?
Well, sort of.
It's Old Wen, isn't it?
No.
You find Old Wen the most relatable.
No, but I love him. I adore him.
He's the best. He's wonderful.
Yeah. No, I actually think that it changes for me in that I actually find Chu to be more relatable for about the first half of the film, and then about halfway through there's some kind of X and it crosses, and then it becomes Jiaxian for me. And I think part of it is that I find Jiaxian to be a little bit cold, and I kind of don't like how she's feuding with Chu. And I also find Chu is somebody who's sliding from middle age to old age uncomfortably. And I'm younger than him, but I feel like I'm sliding from youth to middle age uncomfortably and feeling a little bit kind of annoyed at the younger people, but also sort of like, wait, am I just an old fool who's becoming irrelevant? Or no, I still am relevant.
Get off my yard.
Yeah, well, there's some of that, but also kind of like, and also the ritual of the cooking too. And I think actually what kind of really made me start relating to Jiaxian is when she takes the groceries to her pseudo boyfriend's apartment and just feels the need to cook. And that was something I completely relate to. You know, I know exactly how she feels, and I know how difficult it would be for her. And I also know that, like, I know what it's like to like want to cook at somebody's house, and they're just kind of like, they want something else from you. Like they would rather call takeout. You know, in his case, it's probably sex. But it could be anything, you know, whereas like I just want to like relax and like cook for 2 hours and maybe pour a glass of wine and get emotional, and they're not down for it. And then I think also her sheer affection for Old Wen at that moment, I think also, and her obvious concern for her father, the more she warmed to Chu, the more that she became more relatable to me. And then Chu became kind of increasingly mysterious in a way. Yeah. And I'm not entirely sure how I feel about his, you know, love affair with the younger woman. I think, you know, it's I think I mostly feel fine about it, but it did. I think she became the more relatable character for me over time. But there was something I found a little bit off-putting about her, and maybe it's that we associate coldness with beauty sometimes, and that could be part of it as well.
I think he probably intends that.
Yeah,
I think that's part of the sort of, whether you call it a dirty trick or just a good trick or you know, or whatnot. I think we come into the movie being like, ooh, she's kind of a bitch. Yeah. But then the joy of the movie is discovering why she's a bitch. And that she's not. And she's not. And then you know, I mean, and you're right. I think the heart of their story is their relationship. You know, her and her father's relationship. All the other stories are there
as kind of like the mushrooms, and if we're doing ramen, the noodles, they're the chashu and the broth,
Yeah.
and to borrow from Tampopo.
I've got a Chekhov question. I've already sort of tipped my hand a little bit here. You and I talk about Chekhov a lot, but did you find this movie echoing Chekhov in terms of its structure and the storytelling? Or is it a case that sort of Chekhov set the terms of emotional drama, and now everything like this kind of owes such a debt of existence to Chekhov that we can't kind of get out from underneath the umbrella?
Well, I have to say, I think you're more acquainted with Chekhov's works than I am. I sort of know them vaguely, and I often sort of know them through pastiche. Like I read Our Country Friends, Gary Steingart's novel, which I know enough about Chekhov to tell that he was very clearly pastiching Chekhov. Like the protagonist is like so-and-so, a landowner, and like there's a dramatis personae at the beginning. And I've read a couple Chekhov short stories. I've never read a novel, and I've never read or gone to one of his plays. So I don't know the material as well as you do. And, I feel like that's one of my deficiencies. It definitely felt narratively familiar to me.
Yeah.
It definitely felt like we were tapping into an old structure. And like, it would not have surprised me to have read, oh, this was based on Sense and Sensibility, or like, which he actually made a film about, or this was based on, All's Well That Ends Well, or Much Ado About Nothing. Like it had like a man, 3 daughters, 3 suitors. The man has a suitor. Like it had the structure and of course, Shakespeare and Chekhov are not very similar and are from completely different eras. I mean, Chekhov's sort of the inventor of the modern storytelling era in a way, along with maybe, Mark Twain and Charles Dickens and some others. Chekhov's much older, but I did feel like, oh, this is a variation on an old idea here, and a wonderful variation on an old idea.
We should watch the film version of Vanya on 42nd Street. I think that's it might be, I don't know. I really liked your answer about the cook, the thief, the wife, and his lover, and her lover, that like anything can be upper middle brow. It's just the way that we talk about it. And I think that Vanya on 42nd Street really hits kind of the way, like, that is like an art house movie. Sure. I mean, like not a lot of people saw that, I think. It's in the same ballpark as people who are like, have you ever seen My Dinner with Andre? It's great. It's just Wallace Shawn and Andre Gregory having dinner. And sure enough, Wallace Shawn and Andre Gregory are both in this version of Vanya on 42nd Street.
Excellent. A tip of the hat.
But it really... Yeah, it's really like watching that alongside this, I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like, yeah, and I'm glad you buy that definition, and you don't have to agree with it. But that is the way I think about it.
It opens up the door for everything.
Yeah, well, no, sure, but I think it's a discipline, right? Which is that, like, it should be fun. Right, like we're not watching it to be sort of like, let's put on our like turtlenecks and talk like detail. that like.
I don't have a turtleneck on, thank God.
You could pull your hood up like the nihilists in The Big Lebowski. I think that you can run around with giant.
You're nihilists. We believe in nothing.
We believe in nothing. This film is only about the idea of film, and I love it. I mean,
his girlfriend cut off her toe.
It's not fair.
Yeah.
Which is, I believe that's Flea in that role.
That's amazing.
Good actor. Flea is a good actor.
Yeah.
Well. For the next draft, question for you, and also that last scene. I interpreted it a little bit differently than the way you described it. What I interpreted it is he tastes the broth. He starts. They start bickering about whether there's too ginger, and in the midst of that bicker, it's not like his taste suddenly comes back. It's what happens is they both realize, oh, he wouldn't have noticed that if he couldn't taste it, and they have this sort of shared realization that his taste has returned. What explanation do you believe this film gives for Chu both having lost and then later regaining his taste?
Oh, that's a great question. I want this film to to hold its cards close to its chest about it. I don't want it to be that it's like the unfolding of that after his wife died, he put away his taste, and then, upon the blooming of his new relationship and approaching fourth parenthood, his taste returns. I don't want it to be that. And I think Ang Lee is a better storyteller than that. But like something has changed for sure, and I hope that it is the fact that everybody is kind of in a rut. Like we begin this movie and everybody is pretty much kind of stuck. Even the youngest daughter is sort of like in a dead-end job at Wendy's. We get this great opening shot of an American being like, I ordered chicken. Somebody's like, that is chicken.
I wonder if that was the screenwriter, James Seamus.
I wonder. That would be
It kind of
awesome.
looks like him, and he seems to be speaking in Mandarin. And I'm like, how many? I wonder if that's a cameo of the, because I'm like, what is this like, pasty European-looking guy doing at this Wendy's speaking belligerent Mandarin? I wonder if we could figure that out, but that's my hypothesis.
But everybody is in a rut,
Yeah.
and the ruptures caused by Wen's death. Wen is like, you can't have this movie succeed without Wen's death. He's the body that you bury in the grave in the Bruce Springsteen song to get your money out of. Like he's the collateral damage that allows the emotional change in the other characters. And I think that the return of taste is these characters literally coming to their senses and beginning to live their lives again. And who knows, like, what the trauma is. Maybe it's the loss of their mother, or in his case, his wife. But I don't think so. They sort of speak very fondly of their mother, and there isn't a lot of ink spilled over the pain of her death. And this movie treats death very matter-of-factly.
Yeah.
Like, what happens when you die? Your friends and loved ones take you to a warehouse. A nice warehouse, but a warehouse with an AstroTurf floor. And they put you in a drawer. But the real glory of his death is that it returns the rest of them to sanity. So I hope that's what it is.
Yeah.
And I do think his taste comes back. I think he has been stuck due to the frustrations of his existence.
I think I agree with that. I mean, I think I do. I agree that it is Wen's death that is the key to essentially all of these characters, but especially Chu, most especially Chu and Jashen, just deciding they are going to admit to themselves and to others what it is they want from the rest of their lives. And I think that Chu has been repressing that for the sake of his daughters, for the sake of just being an old Chinese father in a very traditional sense, being, not being fully able to understand young women, not being able to fully understand the modern world, being kind of the cooking is both a blessing and a curse for him. And so I think it's sort of the perfect metaphor that he's still good at it, but he can't enjoy it in the same way that he used to, because he's not really engaging with himself. He's using the cooking to get away from himself. And I think he does engage with himself. And what he realizes is he is concerned about his daughters, but he also, he wants a little more happiness, and he has the opportunity with the housekeeper. And also he becomes very avuncular and sort of like a grandfather / now stepdad to Shan, in that adoring scene. And that seems to give him a lot of joy and pleasure as well. And it gives her a lot of joy and pleasure. And there's, we didn't mention this, but there's this hilarious sort of subplot where, all the other kids at school get jealous of the amazing, like, 5-star restaurant lunches that she's cooking. And then so he's like, well, cooking for one is the same as cooking for 5. And he starts cooking for the whole classroom. And it's very cute. And you can tell that this relationship is buoying him, and he likes it. And so, it's a little bit undertold, because to preserve the surprise, we don't see I mean, I saw it coming. There was something in the body language of the way in just throughout when we saw him being, set up with Mrs. Lang, and you just had this sense like, ooh, I think something else is going on here. But you never see them like holding hands or kissing or even sharing a look. It was just sort of, it was done in the narrative, and it was done in just the remarkably understated performance of the woman who plays Jinrong, to the housekeeper, too, where even when he's making the announcement, if you watch her, she's looking down on the ground. She knows what he's going to say. Her body language is suggesting that she knows what her mother's reaction is going to be to this, and she's preparing for it. She's sort of quietly gathering her courage, and all of that is played really, really well. But I mean, that's my explanation, is that he's basically allowing himself his emotions, and that's what brings his taste back.
Yeah, and I mean, he's getting to be a father again to Shan Shan, and we discover that Jinrong's baby is another daughter. And maybe the return of the taste is like his sense of being nurturing again, like being able to do that. And what's great is that his taste returns in a moment that he is with Jia Xian. Yeah. That like maybe it's occasioned by this new relationship with Jinrong, but the sort of like secondary benefit, or the primary benefit, is that it repairs the relationship between him and Jia Xian.
And they have reached the point now. It's interesting too, because if you think back, the last thing you see in the penultimate dinner scene is Jia Xian standing there crying, like she's upset. And why is she upset? Is she upset because she's emotional, because she's relieved that he's not going to have a heart attack? Or is she upset because she's offended? And I don't, there is a little bit of a cinematic dirty trick, which is just like fade to black, comes back up, and suddenly everything's fine. Everybody's happy, and somehow it works, though. I guess just the sort of like the awfulness of the penultimate dinner is such that you're just kind of maybe ready to be hopeful at that point. It's kind of like the Goon Squad, like why we get the happy ending in A Visit from the Goon Squad.
He's done the work. He's done the work ahead of time, and you pointed out really nicely the little hints. And and I'm thinking, as you were describing that, like I'm thinking about him watching Shan Shan get onto the school bus, which is a terrible experience.
Yeah. I mean, just all these big people pushing her around, and she's being shoved into strangers' butts, basically. And like, she's too small and it's too crowded.
Yeah. And all of this, like the transit stuff is like that. Yeah. Everything is sort of clustered and cluttered. And I think that's one of those moments where you get hints of it, and I think that's why it makes that fade to black, and then everything is okay. You kind of answered my next question. I was very surprised by the penultimate dinner. I was not expecting him to. I was sort of like, oh God, he's going to end up with Mrs. Liang, and it's going to be awful, and like where's the end of this movie going to go? Is this bad people doing bad things? But I was very surprised. Sounds like you were not very surprised.
No, I saw it coming somehow. I don't know if it was a structural giveaway where I felt like we were being set up for some kind of misdirection, or whether it was in the performance. I think it was something. I think part of it too is that there's something about the way Jinrong is kind of invited in by the sisters, and at one point she gets her kind of pixie cut, and they say you look really young, and there's just something in that moment where you realize there's something a little repressed in this character. Like this character knows something that maybe the rest of it. And I actually just think if I were going to watch the movie again, it would be really interesting to watch her performance. And then I also think there was that scene where Jinrong confronts Chu about is basically like, yeah, I know you've been making her lunches, and that's fine. And by the way, where did the lunches go? Yeah, and so you see, even though there's nothing romantic, you do see this comfort and with one another, and you see that she appreciates his solicitude. So yeah, I saw it coming, and I'm not exactly sure why. There was something. Yeah. If I were to watch the film again, I could probably pay attention to what all the hints were that I was picking up on subconsciously, whether they were performative. I mean, I think there was also Mrs. Lang was just comically bad, and I never really had the sense. I was never misdirected by that. And I think, just as Chu can be said to not fully understand his daughters to some degree, there's a little bit that they don't fully, they struggle to fully grasp his humanity as well. And that scene is the end of that. Like, they have to confront it, and apparently they all do, even though they're all upset. I mean, there's a moment where the volleyball coach, I keep forgetting his name, Lin Dao?
I think it's like Ming Dao or something like that.
There's a moment where he says, like, oh yeah, and I'm gonna move in with Jin Rong, and Ming Dao's like, congratulations, and Jin like slaps him with a spoon, like, you're drunk, Dad, you're confused, and then of course Jin Rong has to sort of very humbly stand up and say, no, your father and I have a romance, and we haven't talked about it because of the divorce, and then of course her mom passes out. Luckily she doesn't die. Like, she goes into not shock, acute
stress reaction. Thank you so much. Thank you. I feel so seen. Yeah. I appreciate that. There's two shots in the film where it feels like somebody just set the camera down. Like, that moment when like you're like trying to shoot something on your phone or whatnot, and then something terrible happens, you've left the rear window of your Saab 900 open when you're going through the car wash, and, and you have to like frantically like put the camera down or
Ladies
whatnot.
And gentlemen, that's a true story from Chris Bag's past.
You were on the other end of the phone. It was great. But there's two moments when that happens, and one is in that scene when Mrs. Liang is like in the deep throes of acute stress reaction and passing out, and like the camera appears to just get plunked down on the table, and it's this sort of like odd shot.
That's great.
Where you can kind of see part of her head and like part of some of the other bodies.
Right.
The other time that happens is when Jia Xian and the airline executive almost have sex.
Interesting.
It's this like very clumsy and uncomfortable moment.
Yeah.
And they're starting to like be intimate, and it's this other moment where like the camera sort of like hovers like on the table, and you see part of her neck and hair and part of his head. And
interesting. I want to go back and watch that. I mean, what it says to me too is like that's one of the things. It's naturalism, and it's one of the things that's different about this film from, say, The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, and even Tampopo, but especially The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. And actually, really, it is that this film is beautiful at times, but the beauty is always naturalistic. The closest thing you get to something like Babette's Feast or The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover is inside the big fancy restaurant with the pots of steam. But the cooking, my favorite shots are them cooking at the house, which is there's not weird lighting. There aren't shirtless soup cooks, there aren't oil paintings of, medieval vegetables and pheasants and geese assembled. It's just intimate camera. The camera is right up on the food. There's that scene close to the very end where Jiashen is laying out the pancakes and then sucking up the little extra dough by kind of like
with the
dough, like just expertly, and then she's doing it while talking on the phone, which is, and it's it actually kind of relates to my next question. So I'll just launch into that, which is, okay, Ang Lee, I'm going to just check my notes. This is not a complete list, but Brokeback Mountain, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, The Ice Storm, Hulk. Do you detect a style in those films? It's a two-part question. That's part A. I'll give you part B once you answer that.
I mean, I'm not going to try to overthink this. No, my sense of whenever people bring up, oh, Ang Lee directed this, I'm like, what?
Yeah,
Like,
I don't think there's a visual style.
It seems this there's no central identity to Ang Lee's filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, you're watching, think about his contemporaries. Like, if you're watching a Spike Lee film, you're going to see wide-angle shots. You're going to see powerful people being shot from below, weak people being shot from above. You're going to see that classic, like, Spike Lee dolly track shot. You know, if you watch a Tarantino film, some girl's going to have her foot up on the dashboard. Like, there's going to be blood, someone's going to have a bloody shirt at some point. If you're watching, I'm trying to think of the other Coen brothers, there's certain symmetries you're going to see. You're going to see Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
You don't get that with Ang Lee.
Yeah.
He is a chameleon. He is an eclectic. He is a fox, not a hedgehog, visually. So at least that's my sense. I don't think they visually have anything in common, really, other than they all are good visually.
Yeah.
But there's not an aesthetic. But I guess the follow-up question B is there anything that those films have in common apart from being good?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen about half of those movies that you mentioned. Seen Brokeback Mountain, seen Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I've seen this now. I think I saw The Ice Storm. I confuse The Ice Storm with it's a Rick Moody novel, and I confuse it with a Russell Banks novel. This is very confusing.
The Sweet Hereafter?
Probably.
Yeah, which was made into a film by Adam McGoyan.
Okay.
Great movie.
Yeah, is there something... Well, I haven't seen...
There's also The Ice Harvest, too. Another, if you want to get extra confused.
More icy?
Yeah. Ice Storm is Kevin Kline, Sigourney Weaver, Key Parties, young Katie Holmes, young Elijah Wood.
The Russell Banks movie and the Russell Banks book that I'm talking about that maybe was The Sweet Hereafter... And I think Nick Nolte was in that, which he was also in a bunch of these others, but is the one about the school bus full of children that cracks through the ice.
That's The Sweet Hereafter, and then Ian Holm wandering around trying to get revenge as a class action lawyer. Yeah, great movie.
Let's see. I would say, such a cop-out answer. He's like the Grace Paley, every character, real or imagined, deserves the open possibilities of life, which is kind of weird coming from Grace Paley, because sometimes you're like, wow, this is a very stylized kind of thing that you're doing. I don't really believe that these people that you've invented are real, but I think that in
possibility, not certainty.
There you go. That's what Grace Paley would say, but she would say it meaner.
Yeah.
She would be she would definitely throw some "get off my lawn" in there. I think he does. I mean, even the I haven't seen the Hulk, his version Hulk, but everything that's been written about it praises the interiority of Bruce Banner's experience, which I'm like, well, yeah. The Hulk is about addiction. That's what that character is about, God damn it. Of course you have to do interiority. And so I think that what he does is he really does a very amazing job of doing interiority on the exterior. I think one of the reasons you like him so much is that he does a lot of the Hemingway-esque stuff that you value so deeply. And I do too. But I think that if you were to compare us, you're a little bit more on that side than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. I was going to say quiet desperation, but it's the same thing. You think about Heath Ledger at the end of that Brokeback Mountain with his daughter. He loves her, and he has this deep yearning and pain that he can't share with her, and it's just all there on his face, and it's in the landscape. You think about Michelle Yeoh And I forget the male lead of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Isn't it Chow Yun-fat?
Yeah, and Chow Yun-fat, and they, one of the things that happens about halfway through the film is that they kind of confess that they've loved each other for the last 20 years and that they've never been able to say that out loud, and that it is, both Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and Hulk are legendary fantasies. And usually in those fantasies, they just do the action and the legendary stuff. They don't stop to wonder a whole lot about how the characters are feeling. But like the best comic book movies, I'd say like Spider-Man, some of the Batman movies, that one, which is, you say it's about addiction. I would say it's about anger, but I think it could be about addiction too. And those two things relate hardcore. And then if you think about like, actually, I don't like all that many of the Marvel movies, but the ones that really kind of capture the emotional reality of like the great metaphor of superpowers is usually someone who is lonely, who has to discover some kind of hidden strength. Like when they hit those themes, like it's really good. And that's why actually like the first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies, I left the theater with tears in my eyes, because it's about, they're about loneliness and found family, and they're goofy and silly and ridiculous and at times gory, but they're about the family you create. And but I'm getting ahead of myself, but like I think if that is the thing that he does, which is he tells stories, but then he gives you information, and it's just enough information about the character's interiority, and you and I can't quite precisely put our finger on why Chew gets his taste back, but you bought it, right?
Yep, totally. 100%.
And in that moment, I mean, I've watched it twice now, and it wrecked me both times that I watched it. It's not just him getting his taste back; it's also there just like after feuding, bickering, worrying about each other, bantering throughout the film, the look they give each other and just the love and joy that they are sharing with each other in that moment, completely unfiltered. Everything has been subtext.
I want to feel what they're feeling in that moment. And that is the success. That is a successful movie or piece of art or whatever. Like that's what we're trying to do.
And I completely believed it. And I wasn't ready for it. And I was ready for the one surprise we talked about, but I wasn't ready for that moment, and it completely killed me. And I mean, I don't know. Having watched this, I wouldn't have necessarily said this before we watched this movie, but if you think about Ang Lee's generation, I don't know that there's a better filmmaker, someone who's about 60 now, I don't like, and that would include like Quentin Tarantino, Spike Lee, Coen Brothers, the people who came of age in the 80s or the 90s, maybe late 80s or 90s, Catherine Bigelow, David Fincher, Wes Anderson, I'm sure there's a few other, Jane Campion. He's got to be one of the best of that generation, but you don't always think of him because he doesn't have that memorable visual style.
It's true. He doesn't have something to like hang his hat on visually,
right.
Like most of those other directors have like honed their portfolio.
So directors, if you're not a genius, you better have something like Spike Lee's Tracking Shot.
Yeah.
You better have the calling card. That's the wrong lesson to learn.
Yeah, right. Like, the right lesson to learn is be like Ang Lee.
Be like Ang Lee.
Tell great stories.
Be like Ang Lee taking Bruce Lee's advice. Be like water. Follow the path the story wants to follow.
Yeah.
Like water forming a drainage in the desert.
I like that.
I think we could do trivia.
Let's go to trivia.
I think you're first.
Okay. So, this movie, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, resulted in 2 separate spin-offs, neither of which were directed by Ang Lee.
Wow.
Which of the following is not one of the spin-offs? So I'm going to give you 3 options. Your job is to pick the one that was not actually created.
Wow.
Okay. Was it A, the movie was actually called Eat, Drink, Man, Woman 2012? A sequel in which related characters to the original family explore similar themes.
That's right up there. It's like my idea sideways too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. Option B, Comer, Beber, Hombre, Mujer, a Spanish film adaptation that reprised the action of this movie, but setting it in the Basque area of Spain and recalling similar geopolitical tensions as the parent film. C, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, the musical, a 2019 musical that closed after, count it, 2 matinees and 1 evening performance.
Ooh.
Yeah, rough.
Ugh. Okay. The most plausible is Comer, Beber, Hombre, Mujer in my mind. So I think it's not. I think that is one of them. Eat, Drink, Man, Woman 2012 sounds just stupid enough for like actual like Hollywood filmmakers. Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, the musical also sounds like something that would have happened. I just think like they probably would have done a little bit of a better job with it than that. Maybe not. It certainly is the kind of story you would turn in the musical. It's like 7 wives for 7 brothers. It's got that kind of feel. But I feel like if they were going to do it, they would also give it some stupid like shortening name like Les Mis. It would be like Eat.
Oh my God, you're right. Just like
they would just call it Drink. So that is the C, the musical is the one I think was made up.
Oh, my powers of creation were too good. The fake one here is Comer, Beber, Hombre, Mujer.
Okay. I was a little bit. I was like Basque. There's not. I don't quite see. I mean, you sort of have the like Taiwan, mainland China thing.
Yeah, little separatist flavor there.
So they really made a musical out of it, and it really flopped.
Yeah, I watched some of it. And I was like, "Oh God, this is quite bad. This is not great."
It just shows show business appetite for not taking risks. That you'd always rather do a sequel these days and make a bad sequel. At least the people who saw the first one will come watch it. Whereas like a good new movie, that's too much of a risk, or a good new musical.
Yeah, it makes me. The state of Broadway at the
Get
moment.
off my lawn,
Get off my Broadway. Get off
my town hall theater.
Get off my proscenium.
I'm trying to remember. Is it 43rd, 42nd Street? Is sort of like
there's a big theater
Times
row
Square.
on 42nd. Yeah.
Get off my orange line. Get off the Q train. Okay, your trivia. Ong Lee, I really actually wanted to find a question about James Seamus because I tried to figure out whether James Seamus actually speaks Mandarin or not, or whether he wrote the film in English and it was translated, which would be amazing. There were 2 writers, and the other one was a Taiwanese woman, who has also worked with Ong Lee a bunch. But I couldn't figure that out. So I did find an interview where Ong Lee said that Chu in this film was partially, at least, inspired by his own father. What was his father? His father was also somewhat prominent, as is Chu. What was his father's job? A, he was a chef at a well-regarded but not top restaurant in Taipei. B, he was a high school principal at a well-known school in Taipei. C, he was a route negotiator for airlines with a notable career and most notably worked for Pan Am in the 1960s. Or D, he was a leading Mandarin language Silver Age sci-fi writer who specialized in hard sci-fi and anthropological sci-fi.
I was like, there has to be a D. There has to be another option. I'm gonna go C.
He was not a route negotiator. He was, in fact, a high school principal.
Well,
which, makes sense. Similar sort of authority figure as Chu, and it also kind of explains the setting of the school building a little bit.
Did this movie meet your expectations?
I expected it to be great, and it was great. And I want to watch it again because it kind of snuck up on me, the ending, not the penultimate, but how, and then I was rewatching it a little bit again today, and I started noticing things I didn't notice the first time, and I definitely feel like it's something of a masterclass of just good, strong, subtle filmmaking.
Like any child, you sometimes begin to resist the things that your parents hold dear, and I know my mom really loves this movie, so I think I had a little resistance to it. But I knew it was going to be. My mom's got great taste.
Okay, careful, Peter Bagg listens.
I know
to
he listens to this,
now.
but the thing that I would say, my mom has excellent taste.
Oh, sure,
like that's like one of the things that that's one of the things that's so amazing about my mom. She has like impeccable taste. So, regardless of my stupid resistance, generally, like when Pat Bagg is like, "Hey, we should go see this movie," you should say yes. So I expected that it was going to be well made, and maybe I wouldn't be swept away by it. And I was wrong. It was beyond well made, and I was completely swept away by it. I will watch it again. I can't wait to watch it with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be a fun date night movie, sort of. Did it make you hungry?
You know, I was thinking about asking you a question about whether or not this was actually a foodie film. You know,
I absolutely think it is. Both in the sense of sort of Monica's usage of just the kind of this, you know, lots of lingering camera over, you know, cutting the fish open and I mean, so many shots, folding and squeezing the dumplings together. There's also that moment where, I mean, he doesn't want to kill the carp, after Old Wen dies too. But I also think it is in the sense too that the film, it has something to say about food and food's power in our lives and our relationship to food. So to me, it absolutely is a foodie film for both of those reasons. What about you?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the reason why it came up for me was that like I began seeing like, oh, well, in any kind of great work of art, there is some sort of like there has to be a skeleton. If you just say what happened in the correct order, you just have something boring. And really good works of art have very often hidden skeletons, that kind of provide the scaffolding that you can hang the rest of your very affecting story on top of. And in this movie, I was like, oh, well, he's just chosen food, but this is such a timeless story that he kind of could have chosen anything. And it, like any really great work of art, began questioning my own sense of like, what does it mean to categorize or label anything?
Yeah, and I think that's right. But it would feel different. And I think you're right. You could tell a similar story around a family that was obsessed with chess. And everybody plays chess, and they gather on Sunday nights and play chess. And in particular, the father and the daughter like to argue about chess. And the daughter was going to be a chess master, but the father wouldn't let her because that's or a theater family. And every night they put on a little play for the neighbors, or every Sunday night, you could do all of those things, but then each one would have different valences. There would be different things that reveal themselves. And so, yes, you could substitute something for food, but it wouldn't really feel the same. And it's also, it is part of watching a movie is sensual pleasure of visuals, and you need some affordance of that. And sometimes you can have movies that, well, maybe the visuals are only okay, but the dialogue's great, or the just the performance is so good. But it does give you this sort of part of the joy of watching the movie is watching the food, imagining the food, thinking about the food, watching the characters argue about the food, watching the characters' relationship to the food change. And I'd also think, how you and I both immediately sense that Chu and Jashen's relationship is the main story, and there are all these tendrils to it. And they're the thing that they have the most in common is their relationship to food, too. It forms their greatest conflict and also their greatest agreement and their greatest bond.
That's a great answer, yeah. I mean, like, your choice of skeleton is crucial when you're making your thing. You know, if you're going to set your novel at, like, a wacky tennis academy on the outskirts of Boston, like, your choice of stuff kind of like supplies you with your available figurative language and like your available metaphors and the associations that the language that you're working in has with that subject. It's fantastically interesting.
Yeah, and the characters, they need to fit comfortably or uncomfortably into that space. But if they fit uncomfortably into the space, it has to be uncomfortable. Yeah. And if they fit comfortably into this space, that has to tell us something. And there's going to be something, different about tennis kids than, food kids.
Yeah. Yeah, for every Hal...
And tennis dads. And
for every Hal in Candenza, you need an Orin in Candenza.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and for every Jashin, you need a Jajin.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have watched this film again before talking about it. I would love to watch it again and talk about it again.
I know.
It's like Citizen Kane in that way for me. I think it is the most masterful thing we've seen in this series yet. I would maybe put Babette's Feast at number 2.
Yeah.
Well, but Tampopo is awfully good.
I think
Gosh, they've all been...
that would be a hard decision.
It's hard.
I think this is... I think this beats Tampopo by a nose, but it's a real close... It's a real close one.
Yeah, they're trying to do different things.
Yeah.
Tampopo is a little more experimental and a little more idea heavy, and it succeeds at that. This one's more naturalistic. It's a naturalistic family drama. This does feel like a 70s film, sort of Asian pastiche of a 70s American film, and Tampopo feels like a Asian pastiche of a 1960s or 50s Western too.
Yeah, totally.
And they both succeed, but I don't like. It makes me nervous to try to rank them. I don't like.
I don't think we should, but it's an interesting idea.
It's interesting. It's worth thinking about.
Well, JPD, what is coming up next?
Coming up is Mostly Martha, which is a 2001 German film. The director is somebody named Sandra Nettelbeck. I haven't seen it. This was another one I found in some lists, and I found intriguing, and I sort of picked it for kind of geographical diversity and also temporal diversity. And Monica says it's good, so
she hasn't let us wrong yet.
She hasn't. Nope, she hasn't.
Well, Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the revered old men of the busy kitchen. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by me, Chris Bagg. You can learn more about us at uppermiddlebrow.com.
We still have a listener survey on our website, and y'all, we're going to leave it there until we get like
10,
a quorum of responses. So if you are not Philip or Peter Bagg, you need to go there and fill it out.
Yes.
And which by the way, Peter Bagg is willing to be entered into a drawing to win a storied Bluetooth speaker, which would be very convenient for you in terms of delivery.
We can save on postage.
Yes, excellent. The Bluetooth speaker is perfect for listening to Upper Middlebrow and your other favorite podcasts. You can go to uppermiddlebrow.com for a link to the survey. We really, 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 really would like you to fill it out. We need some more information, so please do that, and thank you.
As a reminder, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more about us at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Check it out, get in touch, and if you want to talk about how we can help you with your project, big or small.
Maybe retake that last sentence.
Yep. That was just with a floating and. You can see more.
I'm going to edit Chris, everybody, so if you want to see how this works. Chris, I think you had 1 too extra and in there. Let's go ahead and strike that and do it again.
You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. check it out and get in touch if you want to talk about how we can help you with your project, big or small.
Perfect. Nailed it. Got it. I'll send you the bill.